I also seen like it's very interesting on. I just want to point out this since we're on the subject. So like when we get like new paramedics or new EMTs, whatever, it's very interesting on seeing how they look when they first start and then when they first see their death or whatever like that. It's like they had like they change somehow. They changes.
Yeah.
It's like seeing God for the first time. I don't know what it is, but it's just very interesting. It's like you tell them, oh, they grew up. It's like,
Okay, so for those of you who came in late, the topics for the day are death, how to die well, and how to cope with another's death, and how to be a good American, to have it both ways. So let's divide the fact and reality of death into three categories. And they are good death, bad death, and tragic death. So let's first talk about a good death. My father is going to be 90 soon. And he's lived a really, really good life. He was born in a tiny village in Iran. He got a job at a tea company, the biggest tea company in Iran. And his boss asked him to marry his daughter. And my father said no, because my mom was much more attractive. And then he worked for an oil refinery company, the biggest in Iran. And you don't make very much money, but because of the culture, you're very frugal, you're very mindful of how you spend money. With the little income that he made, he sent us to India. Him and my mom traveled to Europe, to certain parts of the Middle East. He retired at the age of 49. He came to America, having sold everything that he had back home. He bought a car wash in Roseville. And for the next 17 years, he washed cars with my brother and I and my mother. And then he sold the car wash and bought a different one, which he still has. He loves to talk about politics. He loves to just travel. Monterey, come here, go to San Francisco, Europe. He still does at his age. He had a tiny little stroke, but it didn't impact his mental faculty. And it didn't really impact his physical body either. Just, he did this tiny little procedure and everything went back to normal. He eats well, he's very calm, relaxed. Temperamentally, he's very positive. But as people get old, they slowly diminish. They walk slower, they think slower. They tend to repeat themselves. They begin to become more forgetful. And then after having spent about 60 years of my life with my father, my brother and I oftentimes, on the phone, because he's in Sacramento, jokingly, but not really joking, we say, well, what should we do with the car wash? Dad is probably going to die in a couple of years. I'm in Oakland, you're over there, You have your own job, I have my own. I can't come to Sacramento or Roseville often to take care of the car wash. Why don't we sell it? And what all of us pray for now is for my father to just go to sleep tonight and not to wake up. Because what's the flip side? He lives another 10 years. He becomes very, very forgetful. Alzheimer's, dementia. He loses the ability to walk, to clean himself. And then slowly he's no longer looked upon as a productive entity in our community. He becomes a burden. And though initially you do it kindly, compassionately, forgivingly, after a while you just say, my father just needs to die. So instead of having someone you care for, someone you love, someone you've been around for about 60 years, see him slowly deteriorate, where he's on various machines. Why not just pray for his ending to come quickly? He's had a very good life. He has a daughter. She went to school, became a pharmacist. She got married. She no longer worked. She raised 2 kids. They're both really good. They're doing their masters, one at Brown, one at NYU. So when it comes to my father's relationship to my sister, he's satisfied. His son, my brother, Iraj, he teaches, he's married, he's got a son, he's going to go to Berkeley soon. His life is relatively okay. Me, the oldest, my life is okay as well. So when it comes to having children and raising them well and making sure that they don't become addicts of sorts, problematic. And he has a wife who is really devoted to him. They've had a relatively good marriage. He's had a good life. What he deserves is a good death. So that's the first thing you need to understand. That good death means people who are, for the most part, very sufficient, very efficient. They don't cause too many waves or ripples in their life. Their kids are relatively good. Their life is relatively good. They don't have very many health issues. And because you're devoted, because I am devoted to my father, I don't pray for him to live another 10 years. The only thing I want is, if there is a goal to come down here, before he loses more abilities, for him to just sleep and never wake up. Now, I don't know whether or not you can appreciate that kind of perspective at your age, being 20, having a lot of ambitions, your parents being relatively young and they being ambitious. As you get older and as your life becomes more busy and as you begin to reflect about meaning and value and purpose, health and sickness and death, maybe in 20 years' time, you can remember this class and our conversation. So perhaps one of the most cruel things that as children you can do for your parents is pray for them to have a very, very long life, knowing full well that old age eventually will turn into sickness and is painful for the person who is sick and for those who have to take care of. the sick person. So the first category of death is a good death. Live a good life. And by good life, I don't mean a happy life. And by happy, I don't mean just laughing all the time. Happy, meaningful. It could be a Jesus Christ. Live in sorrow, but love sorrow. You could be like a Mother Teresa. Live in India. Take care of the poorest, the dirtiest, and yet be happy taking care of these people. Okay? It's meaningful. If you want to pray for your parents to have a long life, you should add a footnote to that prayer. God, give my parents a long life. Let them live to be 500, but only if they are physically healthy. If they're not, kill them. It's called compassion. It's called being aware of certain realities of life. Okay? And to think that way, you need to exercise a good amount of emotional detachment. That yes, he is your father, but he's also a human being. And no human being desires a lot of pain in their life. Now, you may not know this just yet because you're young. But if you can be somewhat imaginative, take yourself back in time when you're really, really sick. Like you got a bad case of the flu and you're in bed. And your mom has to take care of your sister, your kid brother, perhaps your husband. And she's worked 8 hours. She's coming home. She's exhausted. And there you are, sick. And she has to make you soup. And she has to change your clothes. And she has to make sure you're okay. And then what do you say to her? You say, Mom, I'm really, really sorry. You feel bad for being sick. Why? Because you realize you're a burden to your mom, to your dad, to your brother, to your sister. You put a damper on the entire household environment. Okay? Now, let's talk about the second category, which is bad death. So remember, a good death is your physical life is relatively good and healthy. Your emotional life is relatively good and healthy. Your intellectual life is relatively good and healthy. Your spiritual life is relatively good and healthy. You live to be 90, 95, or even 75. And then you say, I have lived long enough. This is just borrowed time. You're not a burden on anyone or to anyone. Everybody enjoys your company. And then you put your head down and you just never wake up. That's a great death. Now let's talk about what a bad death is, Neon. Life is a struggle for all of us, but some people just struggle more than others. Maybe it's just bad luck. Maybe the gods just don't like them. Maybe if reincarnation is true, they have to come into this life to pay the price for all the wrong things they have done in previous lives. It's a blessing to be able to walk freely without the aid of a cane or a walker or a wheelchair. It's a blessing to be able to walk to the cafeteria without having tanks following you because you need oxygen. It's a blessing to just be able to be mobile without having aches and pains in your body. It allows you to be independent. You want me to tell you what a bad death is? Are you sure? Are you passing this class? The answer is no. Have you done the assignments? The answer is no. Beg for a passing grade. Beg me. This is what happens when you're sick. You see why you didn't beg? Because you have pride. It saves you face. It says my life is meaningful. I am somebody. I don't need anybody to make it in this life. It gives you power. It gives you control. Forgive me, I didn't mean to offend you in any way, but oftentimes if you really want to understand something, you need to feel, things you haven't felt before. In sickness, you begin to beg. And people are proud. You don't want to come to my office and say, I need to pass this class. Nobody does. When you walk the streets and you see a homeless person, it's not like they had everything, all of a sudden they end up in the street, now they're begging. They tried again and again and again and again. It's something about our nature that you will do whatever you possibly can to remain autonomous, independent. You don't want to be enslaved by anyone or anything. You want to move around freely. And so when you get sick, your kids want to go to the park, but they can't because you're sick. Maybe your wife or your husband want to go out just for a walk, but they can't because you're sick. They have to tolerate you. You're a burden. You're like something that clutters the house. There is another problem with bad death because it goes against the first principle of life. What is it that life wants? Any organism. Life desires to continue its existence. You're sick, man. You're on tubes. All the doctors have given you bad news. There is no way in hell you're going to recover. And yet rarely do you find people who say, well, end my life then. You know why? Because inside every single person in this class, there is hope. There is this imagination in the future that something will happen. Maybe a miracle drug will take place. When I was very, very young, I had a girlfriend for about, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I didn't know she had MS. And I don't know if you know what MS is, multiple sclerosis. Your neurons have this clothing on them, the myelin sheet. And it allows messages to get to the right places. And what this particular disease does, it destroys the sheets, these protective clothings. And so when you want to take a step forward, there needs to be a message. The brain, my leg is moving forward, so move it. And when the message is delayed, you don't have enough muscle mass. So what happens is, as you take the step, you're not ready, so you just fall. And I tell you that for 6 of those years in that relationship, we went to all sorts of doctors and magicians. And some said, oh yeah, get stung by bees. Some would say, yeah, you need to drink a lot of honey. Some would say, you need to go on horseback rides all the time. That's what people do, you know. A bad death. You've always wanted to buy a house, but you couldn't. You've always wanted to be in a good, healthy relationship, but that didn't work out. You wanted good kids. One is serving life in San Quentin. The other is listening to Johnny Cash, a false from prison. So your kids didn't come out too good either. You've always been on drugs, on alcohol. You've been a burden to yourself and to other people in your life. And you've abused your body so much that your body eventually asks for justice. I'm not going to be moving you around anymore. You just have to live with your desires, never becoming fulfilled. And you realize you're sitting in the chair and you can't walk and you can't move around. And then you realize breathing is becoming a bit more difficult. So you need an oxygen tank next to you. And then because you sit so much, you lose muscles in your shoulders, in your arms, in your legs. And your back just gives. And now you're in a wheelchair. And then as you're in a wheelchair going around the lake, you see all these people walking and you're filled with anger. And it reminds you of your past, how you slowly destroyed your body, how you slowly destroyed your family, your kids, your wife, your husband, your parents. And not only are you haunted by the fact that you see people laughing and walking around and you resent them, you're angry for the things you can no longer do, you're also haunted by your own memories of how many awful things you have done to yourself, to other people. And then as your wife, who really doesn't like you very much, is in the kitchen trying to make food for 20 people, you say, "Honey, I need my medicine." And she says, "Damn it, wait!" And you realize how much of a burden you are on her. But there isn't much you can do. Little by little, life is taking away your abilities. Next thing, like my father-in-law, you find yourself stage 4 cancer, laying flat on the bed. There isn't much you can do. You know what happens when you're laying on your deathbed? And everywhere you look, you see destruction. Your wife doesn't like you, your kids don't like you, you don't like you. You never did anything right in your life. And you have this cancer that's not going to go away. You can't walk, you can't bathe, you can't even talk, man. And once in a while, as cancer force is slowly just ravaging through your body, you whisper to your God, you know, "Just kill me. I've had like 50 years of misery. Just kill me." God says no. You know, you could have a difficult physical life and be emotionally okay. You could have an extremely difficult physical and emotional life, but your intellect is your Messiah. It organizes things. It makes you a good stoic. Your wife's anger will pass. Your kids will come back and apologize. Don't worry. But when you have nothing working inside you, your physical life is a mess, emotional life is a mess, intellectual life is a mess, and when you're sick, man, you got no soul. You don't have a spirit that's healthy. That comes much later. That is what we call a bad death. That you close your eyes in hopes of never waking up, but you do wake up. What exactly is it you wake up to? Trash. Nothing in your life works. And remember what I said. None of us in this class enjoy begging anybody for anything. Some of us in this class would rather steal than to ask someone for $1 to buy a cup of coffee. That is pride, man. And it's natural. It gives you and your life value. It gives you hope. And then there is tragic death. Russell is a father. He would enjoy seeing his kids getting married, graduate from good schools, getting good jobs. Look at you. The age range in this class from 17 to about 35, 36. All these young punks in this class. And what is it that all of you have in common? You want to graduate from Laney. You want to go to Oxford, Yale. You want to get your bachelor's, you want to get your master's, hopefully. You want to find yourself a decent job that gives you decent amount of money. You want to buy a house, hopefully get married to someone decent, have some kids or adopt some kids, be relatively sociable, help the homeless, help the needy, take care of your parents, become grandparents. You know what you guys have? You guys have something that I don't. You have about 50, 60 years ahead of you that you look forward to. I don't. Most of my life is behind me. What you guys have in common is that all of you have dreams. And you want to see those dreams come to life. But it's not just about you, you know. His mother is looking forward to taking him to Universal Studios. Every single one of you in this class who have a good relationship with your parents, or even not, your parents look forward to seeing you graduate, to being successful, to being happy. You give your parents hopes and dreams. You give your parents a reason to live. And God forbid if something happens to you. See, my father is 90. He doesn't have dreams. And if he does, they're tiny. Practically speaking. Tragic death is when you have someone who hasn't really lived life yet. I'm not talking about the philosophic living a life like Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about being young. 15, 16, 17, 30, 40, being young enough to still have hopes. That life hasn't yet touched you, contaminated you, broken you, shattered you. And if someone asks, how do you live? You say, I don't live by bread alone. I live by my imaginations, by my fantasies, by the things I will be 20, 30, 40 years from now. And as you're driving, say on Skyline, a tree falls on you. Or if you've seen the movie City Hall, Al Pacino, you're a mother walking your son to his first grade class, and all of a sudden someone shoots a gun and the bullets hits the head of your 5-year-old. That's called a tragic death. It's tragic on so many different levels. It's like your parents have this dream, but all of a sudden it gets butchered. It remains incomplete. Now you better hope that if you're young and something tragic was to happen to your existence, it would be a quick death. That you're not going to be on tubes at the age of 10, where you become a burden to yourself, to other people. But kids are much more resilient. They can do this stuff much better than adults. So a tragic death is when you're young and your life is just taken. So these are 3 areas of death. And I know that wasn't your question. So remember, if you take a philosophy class, a philosophy on death and dying, psychology of death and dying, or when you're just hanging out with your friends, and all of a sudden the topic of death comes about, you never want anyone to have a tragic death. And you never want anyone to have a bad death. Always ask for people to have a good death.